The sound of wood scraping against wood froze Henrik Xavier in his tracks as he approached his tool shed. His arms full of firewood that he had been splitting all morning while his two young daughters played in the yard under the watchful eye of his neighbor. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and dying leaves, but also something else, something unfamiliar and faintly musky that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had heard stories all his life about orcs raiding frontier homesteads, about their savagery and bloodlust, and living this far from the nearest town meant that help was hours away if trouble came calling. His heart began to pound as he carefully set down his armload of wood and reached for the axe. He kept leaning against the outer wall of the shed, its blade still sharp from the morning's work. The door to the shed stood slightly ajar, which was wrong because Henrik always latched it properly to keep out the raccoons and foxes that prowled around looking for scraps. Through the gap, he could see movement, a large shape hunched over his workbench where he kept his own woodworking tools for the long winter nights when farming was impossible, and a man needed something to occupy his hands. Henrik's wife had died 3 years ago during a harsh winter, taken by fever that no medicine could cure, leaving him alone to raise Clara and Emma, ages 6 and 4. The girls were everything to him now, his entire world condensed into 2 small beings with their mother's dark curls and curious eyes. He pushed the door open slowly, the old hinges creaking despite his best efforts at stealth, and what he saw made him stop completely, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. An orc woman sat on his work stool, her broad shoulders hunched as she carved something from a piece of birch wood, the shavings falling like snow onto the dirt floor around her bare feet. She was massive compared to human women, easily 6 feet tall even seated, with powerful arms that showed defined muscle beneath skin the color of spring moss. Her black hair hung in a thick braid down her back, and when she heard him enter, she whipped around with startling speed, her amber eyes going wide with what looked like fear rather than aggression. In that instant, Henrik saw everything clearly. The orc woman wore tattered clothing that barely held together, a tunic and pants that had once been of decent quality but were now stained with mud and blood and torn in several places. Her feet were filthy and cut, as though she had been traveling through rough country without proper boots. Most striking was her face, which bore fresh bruises along one side, the green skin mottled with purple and yellow, and a split in her lip that had scabbed over but looked recent. She was injured, exhausted, and terrified, he realized, not some fearsome raider come to slaughter his family. Behind her back, she shoved something quickly, hiding whatever she had been working on, her tusks visible as she pressed her lips together in what might have been embarrassment or shame. Henrik kept the axe raised but did not advance, his mind racing. Everything he had been taught said orcs were monsters, brutal creatures without mercy or kindness. Yet this one had broken into his shed not to steal his tools or weapons, but to carve something from scrap wood. She had not hurt his daughters who had been playing just yards away all morning. She had hidden here in his shed, seeking shelter rather than violence. "Please," the orc woman said, her voice deep but trembling, speaking the common tongue with a thick accent that made the words sound almost musical. "Please, I mean no harm to you or yours. I will leave, I will go now." She started to rise, and Henrik saw her wince in pain, one hand going to her side where dark green blood had soaked through her tunic. The injury looked serious, potentially mortal if it became infected, and despite every instinct screaming at him to let her go, to be rid of this dangerous presence near his children, Henrik found himself lowering the axe. "You are hurt," he said, keeping his voice level and calm the way he did when approaching a spooked horse. That wound needs tending or you will die from it. The orc woman shook her head, her braids swinging with the movement. I cannot stay. If I am found here, they will kill you for harboring me. I have brought enough death already. There was such deep sorrow in those words that Henrik felt something shift inside his chest. He looked at her properly now, seeing past the green skin and tusks to the person underneath. She was young, he realized, probably not much older than his own 28 years, and her eyes held a grief that he recognized intimately. This was someone who had lost everything, just as he had when his wife died. Who is looking for you? He asked. Everyone, she said simply. My clan cast me out for refusing to raid human settlements. Your kind hunts me because I am orc. I am nothing now, belonging nowhere. Henrik made a decision that would change everything, though he could not have known it in that moment. Sit down before you fall down. Let me see that wound. The orc woman stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign language. Why would you help me? Because you are bleeding in my shed and you have not hurt my children, despite having ample opportunity to do so, Henrik said practically. And because whatever you were making before I came in, you hid it behind your back like a child caught doing something they should not. I want to see what that was. A flush of darker green colored her cheeks, which Henrik found oddly endearing. Slowly, reluctantly, she brought her hands forward and opened them to reveal two small wooden figures, still rough and unfinished but recognizable as a horse and a rabbit. They were carved with surprising delicacy, the details careful and precise, clearly made with love and attention. I found the wood scraps in the corner, she said quietly. I saw your daughters playing this morning. They are beautiful children. I thought I might make them something to leave as payment for using your shed to rest. I did not mean to steal. Henrik felt his throat tighten. This orc woman, running for her life and bleeding from what looked like a sword wound, had spent her energy carving toys for his children rather than planning violence. He set the axe down completely and moved to his supply shelf, where he kept clean rags and the bottle of strong spirits he used for disinfecting wounds on his livestock. My name is Henrik Xavier, he said. I own this farm and the land for 2 miles in every direction. You are currently sitting in my shed without permission, but I am choosing to give that permission now. What is your name? She looked at him with such surprise and cautious hope that it hurt something deep in his soul. Grusha, she said. I am called Grusha. Well, Grusha, I am going to clean and bandage that wound, and then you are going to rest here while I figure out what to do with you, Henrik said firmly. But first, you need to remove that tunic so I can see how bad the damage is. The practicality of his tone seemed to reassure her, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted to argue further. Grusha pulled off the tattered tunic with a grunt of pain, revealing a muscular torso marked with old scars and the fresh sword slash that cut across her ribs on the left side. It was deep but clean, which was fortunate, and though it had bled considerably, it did not appear to have hit anything vital. Henrik had treated enough injured animals to know his way around a wound, and he set to work with steady hands, first cleaning away the dried blood, and then pouring the alcohol over the cut. Grusha hissed through her teeth, but did not pull away, her fingers gripping the edge of the workbench hard enough that the wood creaked under the pressure. Henrik worked quickly and efficiently, packing the wound with clean cloth, and then wrapping bandages around her torso to hold everything in place. He tried not to notice how warm her skin was beneath his hands, or how the proximity to her filled his nose with that musky scent he had caught earlier, something like cedar and rain. You need food and water, he said when he finished, stepping back to wash his hands in the bucket he kept for cleaning tools. When did you last eat? 3 days ago, Grusha admitted. Maybe 4. I have been moving quickly, staying ahead of the hunting parties. Henrik's jaw tightened. Wait here. I will bring you something. He left the shed and made his way back to the house, his mind spinning with the implications of what he was doing. Helping an orc, especially one being actively hunted, could bring serious trouble down on his head and endanger his daughters. The sensible thing would be to give her some food and send her on her way, letting her become someone else's problem. Yet when he thought of her sitting in his shed carving toys for Clara and Emma, children she had never met and who would have screamed in terror if they saw her, he could not bring himself to turn her out. His neighbor, old Samuel Harrison, was still watching the girls as they played with their dolls in the yard, and Henrik waved to show all was well before ducking into the house. He gathered bread, cheese, dried meat, and a flask of water, wrapping everything in a cloth. He also grabbed one of his own shirts, clean and sturdy, since Grusha's tunic was barely holding together. When he returned to the shed, he found her exactly where he had left her, still sitting on the stool but now bent forward with her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Henrik stopped in the doorway, uncertain what to do. He was not good with tears, had never known how to comfort his wife when she cried, and his daughter's tears usually left him feeling helpless and clumsy. But watching this powerful orc woman break down in his shed, he felt that same protective instinct that rose when his children were hurt or frightened. "Grusha," he said softly. She jerked upright, swiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, clearly embarrassed to be caught in such vulnerability. "Forgive me, I am weak." "You are exhausted and injured and alone," Henrik corrected, setting the food down on the workbench. "That is not the same as weak. Eat this." Grusha looked at the food as though it might vanish if she reached for it, then fell upon it with the desperate hunger of someone truly starving. Henrik watched her eat, noting how she tried to maintain some dignity despite her obvious need, chewing carefully rather than stuffing her face. When she had taken the edge off her hunger, she slowed down and looked at him with those amber eyes that seemed to hold entire stories of pain and loss. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "You do not know me. Your people and mine are enemies." Henrik leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest. "My people and your people are enemies because we choose to make each other enemies. I have never met an orc before you, so I have no personal grudge. And you are sitting in my shed making toys for my children instead of threatening them, which suggests that perhaps the stories I have heard are not entirely accurate." "Some of the stories are true," Grusha said quietly. "My clan has raided human settlements. They have killed and taken plunder. I was expected to participate, to prove myself as a warrior. When I refused, when I said I did not want to hurt people who had done nothing to me, they said I was corrupted by weakness. My own brother was the one who cut me." She touched the wound at her side gently. "He said it was a mercy, that I deserved worse for my betrayal." The casual brutality of that statement made Henrik's hands curl into fists. "Your brother did this to you. He was following our laws," Grusha said, though her voice held no conviction. "An orc who will not fight is not truly orc. They cast me out and told me if I ever returned, they would finish what my brother started. So I ran. I have been running for weeks now, stealing food where I could, hiding during the days and traveling at night. I thought this shed was abandoned when I found it. I am sorry. I will leave as soon as the sun sets." Henrik found himself shaking his head before he had consciously made the decision. "You are in no condition to travel. That wound needs days to begin healing properly, and you need food and rest. You will stay here." "I cannot," Grusha protested. "If I am found, then we will deal with that if it happens," Henrik interrupted. "My shed is solid and out of sight from the road. No one comes here except me and occasionally my neighbor, and Samuel minds his own business. You can rest here safely for at least a few days." Grusha stared at him with an expression that mixed disbelief, hope, and fear in equal measure. "You would truly do this? Risk yourself and your children for someone like me?" "I would not be much of a man if I turned out someone who needed help," Henrik said simply. "And my daughters would be ashamed of me when they grew old enough to understand what I had done. I will bring you more food later and blankets for sleeping. For now, rest. You look like you are about to fall over." He turned to leave but paused at the door, looking back at where Grusha still sat with his shirt clutched in her hands and tears streaming down her face. "And Grusha, thank you for making those toys. That was kind." Henrik left before she could respond, closing the shed door behind him and returning to his normal afternoon chores with a sense that his life had just taken a sharp turn into unknown territory. He collected his daughters from Samuel with thanks, and they chattered at him about their games and the butterfly they had seen, blissfully unaware that an orc woman was resting less than 50 yards away. He made dinner for the three of them, simple stew with vegetables from the garden, and while the girls ate, he found his mind drifting back to the shed again and again. That night, after putting Clara and Emma to bed with their customary story, Henrik gathered blankets and more food, adding some of the stew to a bowl that he covered with a cloth to keep warm. The moon was bright overhead as he crossed the yard to the shed, and when he eased the door open, he found Grusha standing by the small window, now wearing his shirt which fit her reasonably well despite her broader shoulders. She had cleaned herself up somehow, her face free of dirt and her hands scrubbed clean, and her hair hung loose around her face instead of in its usual braid. "I brought food and blankets," Henrik said, keeping his voice low even though they were too far from the house for the girls to hear. "How is the wound?" "Better," Grusha said. "The bleeding has stopped completely. You have skill at healing." "I have skill at patching up injured cows and horses," Henrik corrected with a slight smile. "I am glad it translates to orcs." He had meant it as a small joke, but Grusha smiled too, a real smile that showed her small tusks and made her entire face transform. She was beautiful, Henrik realized with a start, not in the delicate way his wife had been beautiful, but in a strong, wild way that caught at something in his chest. He quickly busied himself with spreading out the blankets in the corner where there was room, creating a makeshift bed that would at least be more comfortable than the hard floor. "This is too much," Grusha said softly. "You give too much to me." "I am giving you basic necessities for survival," Henrik replied. "That is hardly too much. Eat the stew while it is still warm." Grusha obeyed, and Henrik found himself sitting on his work stool, the same one she had occupied earlier, watching her eat with more decorum now that the desperate edge of her hunger had been blunted. The silence between them was oddly comfortable, broken only by the sound of the spoon against the bowl and the distant hooting of an owl in the woods. "Tell me about your daughters," Grusha said eventually. "I watched them playing this morning before you found me. They seemed very happy." Henrik felt his expression soften automatically the way it always did when he thought of Clara and Emma. "They are good girls. Clara is 6, very serious and thoughtful. She likes to help me with everything, always asking questions about how things work. Emma is 4 and wild as a March hare, always running and climbing and getting into trouble. They look like their mother." "Where is their mother?" Grusha asked, then seemed to catch herself. "Forgive me, that is too personal a question." "She died 3 years ago," Henrik said, the words still carrying weight even after all this time. "Fever took her during a bad winter. I tried everything, brought in the healer from town, but nothing helped. She was gone within a week of falling ill." Grusha's face filled with genuine sympathy. I am sorry, that is a terrible loss. It was, Henrik agreed. Still is some days. But the girls needed me to keep going, so I did. You learn to carry grief like you learn to carry anything heavy. You find the balance point and you keep walking. That is wise, Grusha said quietly. When my clan cast me out, I thought I would die from the grief of it. Everything I knew, everyone I loved, gone in a single day. But I kept walking, as you say. I did not know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving forward. Henrik met her eyes across the dim interior of the shed, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the window, and felt a connection form between them, fragile as spider silk, but real nonetheless. They were both people who had lost everything and found ways to continue despite that loss. They were both alone in ways that cut deeper than simple solitude. The toys you were making, he said, changing the subject to something less heavy. Will you finish them? Grusha looked surprised. You would allow me to continue. I would like my daughters to have them, Henrik said honestly. But I cannot give them toys made by an orc without explaining where they came from, and I cannot do that without frightening them. So perhaps you could make them, and I will say I made them myself. He expected her to be offended by the suggestion, but instead Grusha nodded with understanding. Of course. It would not be safe for them to know about me, I understand. Yes, I will finish them. I would like to do that very much. Henrik stood, knowing he needed to return to the house before his absence became noticeable in the unlikely event that one of the girls woke and came looking for him. I will check on you in the morning. If you need anything during the night, stay in the shed. It is not safe for you to wander around in the open. Henrik, Grusha said as he reached the door, and the sound of his name in her deep, accented voice did something strange to his heartbeat. Thank you. I know those words are not enough for what you have done, but thank you. Get some rest, Grusha, was all he said in response, and then he slipped out into the night. The next several days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Henrik woke early as always, tended to his morning chores, got the girls fed and occupied, and then found reasons to visit the shed throughout the day. He brought Grusha food and water, changed her bandages, and slowly watched color return to her face as rest and proper meals restored her strength. She, in turn, worked on the wooden toys, and Henrik was amazed by her skill. The horse and rabbit were joined by a carved bird with spread wings and a tiny fox with a bushy tail, each one a perfect miniature rendered in loving detail. Where did you learn to carve like this? Henrik asked one afternoon while Clara and Emma were napping. He had brought Grusha some apples from his small orchard, and she was eating them while putting finishing touches on the fox. My mother taught me, Grusha said, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the wood. She said that orcs were warriors, yes, but we were also makers. We could create as well as destroy. She carved beautiful things, bowls and cups and figurines. When I was young, I spent hours watching her work, learning the way the blade should move, how to read the grain of the wood. Her expression grew sad. She died when I was 12, killed in a raid against a human village. I kept carving because it made me feel close to her again. Henrik absorbed this, adding it to the growing understanding he had of who Grusha truly was. I am sorry you lost her so young. And I am sorry you lost your wife, Grusha replied. It seems we both know the ache of empty spaces where someone should be. As the days passed, Henrik found himself spending more and more time in the shed, beyond what was strictly necessary for checking Grusha's wound or bringing supplies. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, their fears. Grusha told him about growing up in an orc clan, the constant pressure to prove herself through combat, the rigid hierarchy that valued strength above all else. Henrik told her about his childhood on this same farm, learning from his father who had died when Henrik was 20, about meeting his wife at a harvest festival and knowing immediately that she was the one he wanted to marry. "You loved her very much," Grusha observed during one of these conversations, and there was no jealousy in her tone, only gentle understanding. "I did," Henrik confirmed. "I still do, in a way, but the sharpest edges of the grief have worn smooth with time. I will always carry her memory, but it no longer cuts me every moment of every day." Grusha nodded slowly. "That is how it should be. The dead would not want us to stop living." It was on the 6th day of Grusha's presence in his shed that Henrik made a mistake. He had grown comfortable with the routine, perhaps too comfortable, and when Clara asked him where he kept disappearing to, he said without thinking that he was working on a special project in the shed. Clara, being 6 and curious about everything, immediately announced that she wanted to see the project. Henrik's heart nearly stopped, but he managed to distract her with the promise of baking honey cakes together, her favorite treat. That night, he told Grusha what had happened. "I need to be more careful. The girls are starting to notice my absences." Grusha's face fell. "Then I should leave. I have stayed too long already. My wound is healing well and I am strong enough now to travel." The thought of her leaving sent an unexpected spike of panic through Henrik's chest. Somewhere during the past week, he had grown accustomed to her presence, had begun to look forward to their conversations, had started to feel something that he had not felt since his wife died. It was attraction, yes, but more than that. It was connection, understanding, the rare comfort of being truly seen by another person. "I do not want you to leave," he said before he could stop himself. Grusha looked at him with wide eyes. "Henrik." "Not yet," he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Not until you are fully healed. And maybe we can figure out a more permanent solution. You could stay somehow. I have the land. I could build you a proper shelter farther from the house, somewhere the girls would not stumble upon by accident." "That is madness," Grusha said, but her voice held hope alongside the protest. "If anyone discovered you were harboring an orc, then I would deal with it," Henrik interrupted. "Grusha, you have nowhere to go. Your clan has cast you out and humans hunt you on sight. Here you are safe. Here you have shelter and food and—" He trailed off, not quite able to voice the rest of it. "And what?" Grusha pressed, standing from her usual spot to move closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "And me," Henrik finished quietly. "You have me if you want that." The air in the shed seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Grusha reached out slowly, giving Henrik plenty of time to pull away, and placed one large hand against his cheek. Her palm was rough with calluses but gentle, and Henrik found himself leaning into the touch like a plant seeking sunlight. "I want that very much," Grusha whispered. "But I am afraid. I am afraid of what it could mean for you, for your daughters. I am afraid of being the reason harm comes to this place that has shown me such kindness." Henrik covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "I am afraid too. I am afraid of feeling something again after so long being numb. I'm afraid of what people would say, what they would do. But I am more afraid of letting you walk away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been." They stood like that for a long moment, the space between them charged with everything they had not said, everything they were too afraid to name directly. Then Grusha leaned down, Henrik rose on his toes, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative and sweet and terrifying in its implications. Her tusks pressed gently against his face, an unfamiliar sensation but not an unpleasant one, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We are mad, both of us," Grusha said, but she was smiling. "Probably," Henrik agreed, "but perhaps madness is what this situation requires." They made plans that night, sitting close together on the blankets while moonlight painted the shed in silver. Henrik would build a small cabin deeper in his property, disguised to look like a hunting shelter or storage building. Grusha would stay there, and he would visit when he could, bringing her whatever she needed. It was not a perfect solution, but it was something, a way for them to explore whatever was growing between them without immediate danger. Over the next few weeks, Henrik worked on the cabin whenever he could steal time away from his regular duties. Samuel questioned him about the project once, and Henrik explained it exactly as planned, saying he wanted a place to store equipment and maybe do some hunting come winter. The older man accepted this without suspicion, even offering to help with the heavier lifting, which Henrik politely declined. The cabin came together slowly, a simple structure with a small hearth, a proper bed that Henrik built himself, a table and chairs and shutters that could be closed to keep out the cold and prying eyes. During this time, Grusha remained in the shed, but she grew restless with the confinement. Henrik understood her frustration, but could not risk letting her roam freely, not when discovery would mean death for her and ruin for him. To keep her occupied, he brought her more wood and tools, and she carved an entire menagerie of animals for the girls, creatures that Henrik slowly introduced as his own work. Clara and Emma were delighted with each new addition, playing elaborate games with the wooden figures, and Henrik felt guilt twist in his gut every time they praised him for making something that Grusha's hands had crafted. "I wish I could tell them the truth," he confessed to Grusha one evening while sitting in the partially completed cabin, testing the chairs he had just finished. "I wish I could tell them about you, about how talented you are, how kind." "Perhaps someday you can," Grusha said, though she sounded doubtful. "When they are older, when they can understand that not everything is as simple as the stories make it seem." The cabin was finished by the first snowfall, and Grusha moved into it with visible relief at having a proper space again. Henrik had furnished it with everything she might need, including books from his own small collection, warm blankets, and plenty of lamp oil for the long, dark evenings. He visited her every day, often bringing one or both of the girls partway through the woods under the pretense of gathering firewood or checking his traps, then leaving them to play in sight of the path, while he slipped away to the cabin for stolen moments with Grusha. It was a precarious balance, this double life he was leading, but it also brought him a happiness he had not known since his wife's death. Grusha made him laugh with her dry observations about the world. She listened when he talked about his worries for the girls, offering perspectives he had never considered. She was patient when he fumbled through explanations of his feelings, unused as he was to putting such things into words. And she was passionate, though they moved slowly in that regard, both aware that crossing certain lines would change everything irrevocably. Winter deepened and Henrik's visits to the cabin became both easier and harder. Easier because the snow gave him legitimate reasons to be out checking his property, ensuring that fences had not collapsed under the weight and that his livestock were secure. Harder because the cold meant he could not stay as long without risking frostbite, and because the girls were confined to the house more often, limiting his freedom to disappear. It was during one of these winter visits that Grusha told him about the nightmares. They had been talking about inconsequential things, the way the icicles looked hanging from the cabin's eaves, the tracks of a deer Henrik had seen that morning. But something in Grusha's expression made Henrik pause and ask what was wrong. "I dream about my brother sometimes," she admitted, staring into the fire crackling in the small hearth. "I dream that he finds me here, that he brings our clan to finish what they started. And in the dreams, you and your daughters are there, and you suffer for having sheltered me. I wake up terrified, certain that I have brought doom upon you." Henrik moved to sit beside her on the bed, taking her much larger hand in both of his. "You have brought me nothing but joy. Yes, there is risk, but there was risk in being alone too. Risk of dying inside, of becoming just a shell going through the motions of life. You reminded me what it feels like to truly live." Grusha turned to look at him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve everything good this world has to offer," Henrik said fiercely. "You deserve safety and peace and love. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not cast aside for refusing to become something you are not." They made love for the first time that night, the intimacy both strange and wonderful, a joining of two people who had found in each other an unexpected salvation. Henrik learned the landscape of Grusha's body, the old scars that marked her skin, the places that made her gasp and shudder. She learned him in turn, her strength carefully leashed to ensure she did not hurt him, her touches reverent and awed as though she could not quite believe he was real. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blankets, the fire burning low and casting dancing shadows on the walls. Henrik traced idle patterns on Grusha's shoulder and thought about the future, about the impossibility of maintaining this secret forever, about the choices that would eventually need to be made. But for that moment, he chose not to worry. For that moment, he simply let himself be happy. The trouble Henrik had half expected but desperately hoped would never come arrived on a bitter day in late winter when the sky hung low and gray with the promise of more snow. He was in the barn tending to his milk cow when he heard the sound of multiple horses approaching the farm. His stomach dropped because visitors in winter were rare, and multiple riders meant official business of some kind. He walked out to meet them, wiping his hands on his trousers and schooling his face to casual friendliness. There were 5 men, all armed, all wearing the insignia of the town militia. Henrik recognized the leader as Marcus Thorne, a hard man who served as the sheriff, and who had little patience for anything he deemed a threat to order. The other 4 were younger, probably farmers or tradesmen doing their required service, looking cold and uncomfortable on their horses. "Henrik Xavier," Marcus said by way of greeting, not bothering to dismount. "We are tracking an orc that was spotted in this area 3 weeks ago. Green skin, female, traveling alone. You see anything like that on your property?" Henrik's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral and vaguely helpful. "An orc? No, nothing like that. Just me and my girls here, same as always." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You are sure?" "This orc is dangerous, probably a scout for a larger force. If you are hiding information, why would I hide information about an orc threatening my children?" Henrik interrupted, letting a touch of offense enter his voice. "If I had seen something like that, you would have been the first person I told." The logic of this seemed to satisfy Marcus, or at least remove Henrik from immediate suspicion. "Keep your eyes open. If you see anything, send word immediately. We will be checking all the farms in the area." They rode off, and Henrik stood in the yard watching them go, his mind racing. 3 weeks ago someone had spotted Grusha, which meant she must have been seen during her journey to his farm or shortly after arriving. The fact that the militia was still looking suggested they took the threat seriously. He needed to warn Grusha, needed to make sure she stayed hidden, but he could not risk going to the cabin immediately, not when the militia might circle back or be watching from the tree line. He forced himself to go through his normal routine, bringing the girls their lunch, cleaning up the kitchen, starting on the evening chores. Every moment felt like an eternity, but he made himself wait until the sun began to set before telling Clara and Emma that he needed to check on some fence posts and would be back before full dark. They accepted this without question, engrossed in a game with the wooden animals Grusha had carved. Henrik practically ran through the woods to the cabin, his breath coming in white puffs in the frozen air. He found Grusha sitting by the window as she often did, working on a new carving, this one a detailed rendering of a wolf. She looked up when he burst through the door, her expression immediately shifting to alarm at whatever she saw in his face. "The militia came," Henrik said without preamble. "They are looking for you. Someone spotted you weeks ago and they are checking all the farms." Grusha stood slowly, setting down her carving tools with deliberate care. "Then I must leave, tonight, now." "No," Henrik said, the word coming out more forcefully than he intended. "No, they already checked here and found nothing. As long as you stay hidden, you are safe." "For how long?" Grusha challenged. "How long before someone sees smoke from this cabin's chimney? How long before your daughters mention that their father disappears into the woods every day? How long before someone notices that you are buying more supplies than a man with 2 small children should need?" All valid points, all things Henrik had worried about in his darkest moments but had pushed aside in favor of the happiness he had found with Grusha. "Then what do you suggest? Where would you go that would be safer than here?" Grusha's face crumpled. "I do not know. Nowhere is safe for me. But I cannot let you keep taking this risk. I cannot let you endanger your daughters for my sake." Henrik crossed the small space between them and took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. You are the woman I love. Do you understand that? I love you, Grusha. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me laugh and the way you make me feel alive again. I am not willing to let you go." Grusha's tears spilled over, running down her green cheeks and over Henrik's fingers. "I love you too. That is why I have to leave. I love you and Clara and Emma too much to be the reason harm comes to you." They held each other in the gathering darkness, both knowing that something fundamental had shifted, that the fragile peace they had built was crumbling. Henrik's mind worked frantically, searching for a solution, some way to keep Grusha safe while also protecting his daughters. An idea began to form, dangerous and desperate but possibly their only chance. "What if we did not hide?" he said slowly. Grusha pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean? What if we told the truth?" "Not everything, not at first. But what if I went to Marcus and the town council and explained that I found you injured and gave you shelter, that you have been living peacefully on my land, that you have done nothing to threaten anyone?" "They would kill me," Grusha said flatly. "Henrik, humans do not negotiate with orcs. We are monsters to them, enemies to be destroyed." "Some humans think that way," Henrik acknowledged, "but not all. There are good people in town, people who value fairness and mercy. If I vouched for you, if I stood beside you and showed them that you are not a threat, you would be destroyed along with me," Grusha interrupted. "Your reputation, your standing in the community, possibly your life. And what would happen to Clara and Emma if you were gone? No, I will not allow it." They argued about it for an hour, voices rising and falling, neither willing to budge from their position. Henrik insisted that honesty was their only real option, that hiding indefinitely was impossible, and running would only delay the inevitable. Grusha maintained that leaving was the only way to protect Henrik and his daughters, that she could disappear into the wilderness, and they could return to their normal lives. It was a circular argument with no good resolution, and it ended with both of them exhausted and frustrated. "Give me time," Henrik finally said. "Give me time to figure out the right approach, the right words. Do not leave yet, please." Grusha looked at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "A few more days, but if the militia returns, if there is any sign that they suspect you, I am gone. I will not let you sacrifice everything for me." Henrik returned to the house with a heavy heart, his mind churning with possibilities and fears. He put the girls to bed mechanically, barely hearing their chatter about the day's activities, his thoughts miles away with the woman in the cabin. He knew Grusha was right that the risk was enormous, but he also knew that he could not bear to lose her, not when he had finally found something worth fighting for. The solution came to him 3 days later, inspired by something Clara said. She had been playing with the wooden animals, creating an elaborate scenario where all the creatures lived together in harmony despite their differences. "Papa," she said seriously, looking up at him with her mother's eyes, "why do not more people understand that being different does not mean being bad?" Henrik's heart squeezed at the simple wisdom in those words, and suddenly he knew what he needed to do. He needed to show the town that Grusha was a person, not a monster. He needed to make them see her as he did, as someone worthy of compassion and understanding, and he needed to do it in a way that would protect his daughters while also giving Grusha a chance at her real life. That night he went to the cabin and told Grusha his plan. "I am going to introduce you to my daughters." Grusha looked at him as though he had lost his mind. "Henrik, no, they will be terrified." "They might be," Henrik admitted, "but they might also surprise us. Clara and Emma are young enough to not have fully absorbed all the prejudices of the world, and if they can accept you, if they can see past your appearance to who you truly are, then maybe other people can too. We start small, with the girls. Then maybe Samuel, my neighbor. We build a foundation of people who know you, who can speak on your behalf, and when we have enough support, we approach the town council." It was a risky strategy, full of potential pitfalls and dangers. But it was also the only path forward that did not end in Grusha running forever or Henrik living with the regret of not trying. Grusha was silent for a long time, her expression cycling through fear, hope, and resignation. "If this goes wrong," she finally said, "if your daughters are frightened or if word spreads before we are ready, then we will deal with it together," Henrik interrupted. "No more running, no more hiding. We face whatever comes as a team." Grusha took a deep breath and nodded. "All right. When?" "Tomorrow," Henrik said, committing to the decision before fear could change his mind. "I will bring them to the woods to gather pine cones for a craft project. We will come to the cabin. I will prepare them first, explain that I have a friend who looks different but who is kind, and who made all the toys they love." He spent the entire walk back to the house second-guessing himself, imagining all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But he also thought about Clara's words about people being different but not bad, and Emma's fearless curiosity about everything in the world, and he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the innocent wisdom of children could lead the way. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with pale sunlight filtering through the bare tree branches. Henrik made breakfast for the girls, his stomach too knotted to eat anything himself. Clara noticed his distraction and asked if he was feeling well, her little face creased with concern. Henrik smiled and assured her he was fine, just thinking about the day's activities. After breakfast, he bundled the girls into their warmest coats and led them out into the woods, carrying a basket ostensibly for collecting pine cones. Emma ran ahead as always, her laughter ringing out as she discovered icicles and interesting rocks. Clara walked beside Henrik, her hand tucked into his, comfortable with silence in a way her younger sister was not. "Papa," Clara said after a while, "are we really gathering pine cones?" Henrik looked down at his perceptive eldest daughter. "What makes you ask that?" "You have that look you get when you are going to tell us something important," Clara observed. "Like when you explained that Mama was not coming back from her sickness." Henrik's throat tightened. "You are too smart for your own good, did you know that?" Clara smiled slightly. That is what Mama always said. They reached the cabin, and Henrik called Emma back to his side, suddenly terrified now that the moment had arrived. Both girls looked at the small building with curiosity, clearly wondering what it was and why they had never seen it before. Henrik crouched down to their level, putting himself eye to eye with his daughters. "I need to tell you something, and I need you both to listen very carefully," he said seriously. "I have a friend who lives in this cabin. Her name is Grusha. She looks different from people you have met before, and when you first see her, you might feel scared. But I promise you that she is kind and gentle and would never hurt you. In fact, she is the person who made all those wooden animals you love so much." Clara's eyes went wide. "You did not make them." "No, I lied about that, and I am sorry," Henrik said. "Grusha made them. She is very talented. I told you I made them because I was afraid you would not understand if I told you the truth about her." "What does she look like?" Emma asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement rather than fear. "She has green skin and small tusks," Henrik said carefully. "She is very big and strong. She is an orc." He watched both girls process this information. Emma just looked intrigued, but Clara's expression showed the conflict between what she had been taught about orcs and what her father was telling her. Finally, Clara took a deep breath. "If you say she is kind, Papa, then I believe you," Clara said firmly. "Can we meet her?" Henrik felt tears prick at his eyes. He stood and knocked on the cabin door, calling out softly, "Grusha, we are here." The door opened slowly, and Grusha appeared in the doorway, looking absolutely terrified despite her size and strength. She had dressed carefully in one of the simple dresses Henrik had brought her, and her hair was neatly braided. She looked at the two small human children staring up at her, and Henrik saw her hands shake. "Hello," Grusha said, her deep voice gentle. "I am Grusha. It is very nice to meet you both." Emma stepped forward fearlessly, craning her neck to look up at Grusha's face. "You are really tall." "Did you really make my fox? The one with the bushy tail?" A smile broke across Grusha's face like sunrise. "I did. I am glad you like it." "I love it," Emma declared. "It is my favorite toy. Can you make me a bear next?" Just like that, the ice was broken. Emma chattered at Grusha about all the animals she wanted carved while Clara approached more slowly, studying Grusha with her serious, thoughtful gaze. Finally, Clara spoke. "Papa says you are kind. I can see that he is right. Your eyes are kind even though you look different." Grusha knelt down, bringing herself closer to Clara's height, though she was still larger. "Thank you for giving me a chance. I know I must seem frightening." "You do not seem frightening," Clara said. "You seem sad. Are you sad?" The directness of the question clearly caught Grusha off guard. "Sometimes I am sad," she admitted. "But meeting you and your sister makes me happy." Clara considered this, then stepped forward and hugged Grusha, her small arms barely reaching around the orc woman's neck. Grusha froze for a moment in obvious shock, then very carefully returned the hug, her eyes filling with tears. Henrik watched this scene with his own vision blurring, overwhelmed by the easy acceptance his daughters were showing, the way they looked past surface differences to the person underneath. They spent an hour at the cabin, with Grusha showing the girls her carving tools and works in progress. She let them try carving on soft wood scraps, guiding their hands with infinite patience. Emma made a mess and laughed about it, while Clara managed something that vaguely resembled a turtle and glowed with pride. Henrik sat back and watched his two worlds merging, the secret life and his normal life becoming one, and he felt something like hope beginning to bloom. As they prepared to leave, Clara turned to Grusha and asked, "Can we come visit you again?" Grusha looked to Henrik, who nodded. "Yes, you can visit, but you cannot tell anyone else about Grusha yet. Can you both keep this secret for a little while, until we are ready to tell others?" Both girls solemnly promised, and Henrik believed them. Clara understood the weight of secrets, and Emma would follow her sister's lead. They walked back to the house chattering about everything they had seen and learned, and Henrik felt the first piece of his plan click into place. Over the next few weeks, visiting Grusha became a regular part of their routine. The girls loved going to the cabin, loved spending time with this new friend who told them stories about orc culture and carved them toys and treated them with genuine affection. Grusha, in turn, blossomed under their acceptance, becoming more confident and relaxed. Henrik watched her form a real bond with Clara and Emma, saw the way she listened to their childish concerns with complete seriousness, the way she celebrated their small victories and comforted their minor tragedies. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Henrik lay in his own bed thinking about the next step. They needed an ally among the adults, someone who could help pave the way for Grusha's eventual introduction to the wider community. Samuel Harrison, his neighbor, was the logical choice. Samuel was old enough to have seen much of life's complexity, practical enough to value actions over appearances, and kind enough to at least listen before judging. It was still a risk, but a calculated one. Henrik approached Samuel a few days later, catching him as he was mending a fence near the property line they shared. After some initial pleasantries, Henrik took a deep breath and dove in. "Samuel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." The old man looked up, his weathered face creasing with concern. "That sounds serious." "It is," Henrik admitted. "A few months ago, I found an injured orc woman hiding in my shed. Instead of turning her in or driving her away, I gave her shelter and medical care. She has been living in a cabin on my property ever since. My daughters know her and love her. I love her too. And I am asking you, as my neighbor and friend, to help me find a way to protect her from those who would kill her on sight simply for being orc." Samuel stared at Henrik for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his tools and said, "Show me." They walked through the woods to the cabin, Henrik's heart in his throat, praying this was not a horrible mistake. When they arrived, Grusha opened the door, and Samuel stopped short, taking in the sight of the massive orc woman standing in the doorway of the small cabin. To his credit, Samuel did not reach for a weapon or shout in alarm. He simply studied Grusha the way he might study a complicated piece of machinery, trying to understand how it worked. "You are the orc the militia is looking for," Samuel said finally. "Yes," Grusha replied, her voice steady despite the fear Henrik could see in her eyes. "I mean no harm to anyone. I only want to live in peace. Henrik says you made those toys his girls are always playing with. That true?" Grusha nodded and gestured to her work table where several carvings in progress sat. Samuel walked over and picked up a half-finished deer, examining it with the eye of someone who appreciated craftsmanship. "This is good work. Real good. My granddaughter would love something like this." He set the carving down and turned to face them both. "I will not lie, this is about the strangest situation I have ever found myself in. But Henrik is a good man, and I trust his judgment. And these carvings show care and skill, not savagery. So I will help however I can, but you need a real plan, not just hiding and hoping for the best." Relief flooded through Henrik so intensely he nearly staggered. "Thank you, Samuel. Thank you." The three of them spent the next hour discussing options and strategies. Samuel suggested that they gather a small group of trusted people, individuals known for their fairness and open minds, and introduce them to Grusha one at a time. Build a coalition of support before going public. It was smart and practical, and Henrik wondered why he had not thought of it himself. Over the following month, Samuel helped facilitate these introductions. First was Margaret Sutton, a widow who ran the general store and who Samuel trusted implicitly. She was skeptical at first but warmed to Grusha quickly, especially after Grusha fixed a broken chair that had frustrated Margaret for weeks. Then came Thomas Winters, the blacksmith, who bonded with Grusha over discussions of metalworking techniques. Each person who met Grusha came away with their prejudices challenged, their assumptions questioned. By the time spring arrived and the snow began to melt, Henrik had assembled a group of 8 townspeople who knew about Grusha and supported her right to live peacefully. It was a small coalition, but it was something. The question now was how and when to approach the town council and the sheriff. The decision was made for them when one of the children in town, a boy of about 8, got lost in the woods during a spring storm. A search party was organized, with men combing the forest in all directions. Henrik joined them, his stomach churning with dread because he knew these searchers would eventually reach the area near Grusha's cabin. He tried to steer the group away from that direction, but Marcus Thorne overruled him, insisting they needed to check everywhere. It was Grusha who found the boy first, huddled under a fallen log, soaked and shivering and barely conscious. She wrapped him in her own cloak and carried him toward the sounds of the searchers, knowing full well what it would mean for her to be discovered, but unable to leave a child to die. Henrik saw her first, emerging from the trees with the boy cradled gently in her arms, and his heart stopped. The other searchers saw her seconds later. Shouts went up, weapons were drawn, and Marcus Thorne ordered everyone to stand back while he aimed his crossbow at Grusha's chest. Grusha stood frozen, still holding the boy, making no move to defend herself or run. "Put the child down slowly," Marcus commanded. "She saved him," Henrik said loudly, stepping between Grusha and the crossbow, his heart hammering but his voice steady. "She found him and she is bringing him back to us. Lower your weapon." "That is an orc," Marcus said as though Henrik might have somehow missed this fact. "That is the orc we have been hunting for months." "That is Grusha," Henrik corrected. "She is my friend and she has been living peacefully on my land. She has hurt no one. She has threatened no one. And right now, she has just saved the life of that boy." The boy's father, a farmer named Peter, pushed forward, his face torn between fear and desperate hope. "Jacob, is that my son?" "He is alive but cold and weak," Grusha said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "He needs warmth and dry clothes quickly." Peter hesitated for only a second before rushing forward and taking his son from Grusha's arms. Jacob stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, and Peter's face crumpled with relief. He looked up at Grusha, then at Henrik, then back at Grusha. "You saved my boy," he said wonderingly. "Anyone would have done the same," Grusha replied quietly. "But you are the one who did it," Peter insisted. "You are the one who found him and brought him back when he could have died out there. I owe you everything." Marcus still had his crossbow raised, but uncertainty had entered his expression. The other searchers were murmuring among themselves, looking at Grusha with new eyes. This was not the bloodthirsty monster they had been warned about. This was someone who had saved a child at great personal risk. Samuel stepped forward, positioning himself next to Henrik. "I know about Grusha, have for a while now. She has been living quiet on Henrik's land, not bothering anyone, making toys for the children. She is no threat." Margaret Sutton spoke up next. "I know her too. She helped me with repairs around my store. She is kind and hardworking." One by one, the members of Henrik's coalition revealed themselves, speaking on Grusha's behalf, telling the crowd what they knew of her character and actions. By the time they finished, Marcus had slowly lowered his crossbow, though he still looked deeply uncomfortable with the situation. "This is irregular," Marcus said finally. "Harboring an orc is against the law. Taking one into your home, your land, it is dangerous and foolish. The law is meant to protect us from threats, Henrik said firmly. Grusha is not a threat. She is a refugee who has done nothing but try to live peacefully, and she just saved a child's life. Does that sound like a monster to you? Marcus looked around at the assembled crowd, clearly trying to gauge the mood. What he saw was not the bloodlust and fear he might have expected, but rather curiosity and a growing sympathy. Peter was still holding his son, still looking at Grusha with naked gratitude. The other parents in the group were thinking about how easily it could have been their child lost in the woods, their child saved by this unlikely rescuer. "This needs to go before the town council," Marcus said finally. "A decision like this is above my authority. But I will not arrest anyone today. We will reconvene in 3 days' time. Henrik Xavier and the orc Grusha will present themselves to the council and make their case. Until then, everyone returns home." It was not a perfect resolution, but it was better than Henrik had dared hope for. The crowd dispersed slowly, many of the searchers casting curious glances back at Grusha as they left. Peter approached before leaving with Jacob, the boy now wrapped in multiple cloaks and beginning to show more signs of awareness. "Whatever happens at that council meeting, I will speak for you," Peter told Grusha. "You gave me back my son. That means everything." Grusha nodded, clearly overwhelmed by the entire situation. Henrik put a hand on her arm, grounding her, and together they walked back toward the cabin with Samuel and the other members of their coalition. They had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to figure out exactly what to say to convince the council that Grusha deserved a chance at a real life here. Those 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Henrik practiced his speech until he could recite it in his sleep, focusing on facts rather than emotions, on Grusha's actions rather than abstract arguments about orc nature. Grusha, for her part, carved a beautiful set of toys that she planned to present to the council as examples of her skills and intentions. Clara and Emma sensed the tension and tried to help in their own ways, with Clara writing a letter about why Grusha was her friend and Emma drawing pictures of Grusha carving toys. The day of the council meeting arrived, cold and gray with the promise of rain. The meeting was held in the town hall, a large building that served multiple purposes from elections to festivals. Henrik arrived with Grusha, Samuel, and the rest of their supporters, to find the building packed with townspeople curious to see the orc woman who had been living among them. The council itself consisted of 5 members. Marcus Thorne as sheriff, Alina Wright the mayor, James Carter the town's wealthiest merchant, Helen Foster who owned the tavern, and David Mills the schoolteacher. Alina called the meeting to order and asked Henrik to present his case. Henrik stood, acutely aware of every eye in the room fixed on him, and began to speak. He told the story chronologically, from finding Grusha injured in his shed to the gradual revelation of her character and skills. He spoke about her exile from her own people for refusing to harm humans, about the toys she had carved, about her integration into his family's life. He was factual and straightforward, presenting Grusha not as a charity case, but as a valuable member of the community. When Henrik finished, Alina invited Grusha to speak. Grusha stood slowly, her height making several people in the front rows visibly nervous, but her voice when she spoke was calm and dignified. "I did not come to your land seeking to cause harm or disruption," Grusha said. "I came because I had nowhere else to go. My own people rejected me for choosing peace over violence. I have lived quietly on Henrik Xavier's land for months now, asking for nothing beyond basic shelter. I have used my skills to create toys for children and to help those who needed repairs or work done. I saved a child from the woods because leaving him to die was unthinkable. I wish only to continue living peacefully, contributing where I can and bothering no one. I am not asking to be loved or even fully accepted. I am asking for a chance to prove through my actions that I am not the monster your stories have made orcs out to be. There was something in her words that resonated with the room, a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Elinor looked to Marcus, who reluctantly stood to give his perspective. Everything they have said appears to be true, Marcus admitted. Our laws exist to protect the community from threats, and I cannot in good conscience classify Grusha as a threat based on her actions. However, setting this precedent, allowing an orc to live among us, it opens doors that may be difficult to close if others follow. Perhaps we should be asking ourselves why those doors should be closed at all, David Mills said thoughtfully. If an individual, regardless of their race, proves themselves peaceful and productive, do we not benefit from including them rather than excluding them? The debate went on for over an hour, with various council members and townspeople speaking for and against the proposal. Peter stood and told the story of his son's rescue in detail, his voice breaking as he described how close he had come to losing Jacob. Margaret talked about Grusha's craftsmanship and helpfulness. Thomas the blacksmith spoke about conversations they had shared about metalworking techniques, emphasizing Grusha's knowledge and skills. Finally, Elinor called for a vote. The council would decide whether to formally allow Grusha to remain in the area as a recognized resident, with all the protections and responsibilities that status entailed. It was a simple show of hands, but it felt like the weight of the world balanced on that moment. Elinor voted yes. David voted yes. Helen abstained, saying she needed more time to consider. James voted no, citing concerns about trade relationships with other towns. Marcus was the final vote, and he sat in silence for a long moment, the entire room holding its breath. "I vote yes," Marcus said finally. "With the condition that Grusha reports to me monthly for the first year to ensure there are no incidents or problems. If at any point she proves to be a danger, this decision will be revisited." The room erupted in mixed reactions, some cheering and some grumbling, but the decision was made. Grusha was officially allowed to stay, to build a life here, to exist as more than a hunted refugee. Henrik felt his knees go weak with relief, and when he looked at Grusha, he saw tears streaming down her face. The aftermath of the council meeting was chaotic, but ultimately positive. Some townspeople remained skeptical or actively hostile, but many more were curious or supportive, especially those with children who were delighted by the prospect of more wooden toys. Grusha began to integrate into the community more fully, helping with various projects around town and slowly building relationships with her neighbors. She moved from the hidden cabin to a small house on Henrik's property that he built for her with help from Samuel and other supporters, a proper home with space for her woodworking, and a garden she could tend. Spring turned to summer, and Henrik's relationship with Grusha deepened in ways that felt both natural and miraculous. They were partners now, openly acknowledged as a couple, though this raised eyebrows and provoked gossip. Clara and Emma adored Grusha, calling her Aunt Grusha and spending hours at her house learning to carve and listening to her stories. The girls' easy acceptance helped smooth the way with other children, and soon Grusha found herself surrounded by young ones begging for toys and tales. It was a warm evening in late summer when Henrik realized he wanted to marry Grusha. They were sitting on the porch of her house, watching fireflies dance in the twilight while the girls played in the yard nearby. Grusha was carving something intricate, her hands moving with practiced skill, and Henrik was simply watching her, feeling a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words out before he had fully formed the thought. Grusha's hand stilled on the carving. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes wide. "What? Marry me," Henrik repeated, more certain now. "I love you. Clara and Emma love you. I want us to be a family officially, legally, permanently. Marry me." Grusha set down her carving very carefully. "Henrik, are you certain?" "Marriage to an orc, it will make everything more complicated. People who have accepted my presence might not accept me as your wife, as a stepmother to your children. People will adjust, or they will not," Henrik said firmly. "I have spent enough of my life worrying about what others think. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. That is what matters." A smile spread across Grusha's face, brilliant and beautiful. "Then yes, yes, I will marry you." They married on a crisp autumn day, with the leaves turning gold and red around them. The ceremony was small, held on Henrik's property with Samuel officiating, and the coalition members in attendance along with a surprising number of townspeople who had come to support the union. Clara and Emma served as flower girls, solemn and proud in their roles. Grusha wore a simple dress that Margaret had helped her make, and Henrik wore his best suit, and when they exchanged vows, there was not a dry eye among the witnesses. The reception was an informal affair with food and drink and music, and people who had been strangers to Grusha months ago now danced with her and laughed with her, and welcomed her into their community fully. Peter's son Jacob, now fully recovered, presented Grusha with a flower crown he had made himself, thanking her again for saving his life. Grusha wore the crown for the rest of the day, touched beyond words by the gesture. As the sun set and the party wound down, Henrik and Grusha stood together watching their guests depart, arms around each other, the girls asleep on blankets nearby. They had been through so much to reach this point, had risked everything for a chance at happiness together. And they had won. "I never imagined I could have this," Grusha said softly. "A home, a family, people who accept me for who I am. You have given me everything, Henrik." "You have given me everything too," Henrik replied, pulling her closer. "You gave me a reason to truly live again instead of just existing. You gave my daughters someone else to love them and watch over them. You gave me hope." They stood like that as the stars came out one by one, two people who had found each other across impossible divides and built something beautiful together. The road ahead would not be without challenges, Henrik knew. There would always be those who could not see past Grusha's appearance, who would judge and criticize and create obstacles. But they would face those challenges together, as a family, with love and courage and the knowledge that they belonged to each other. Winter came again, and with it the long evenings by the fire, Grusha carving toys while Henrik read to the girls, their voices mingling with the crackle of burning wood. Spring brought new growth and new projects, expanding the house to better accommodate their blended family. Summer meant work in the fields and gardens, teaching the girls about growing things and caring for the land. Autumn brought harvest and preparations for the next winter, the cycle continuing in its eternal rhythm. Years passed, measured in the growth of Clara and Emma from children to young women, in the expansion of Grusha's woodworking into a thriving business that served towns for miles around, in the deepening lines on Henrik's face, and the silver that crept into Grusha's black hair. The initial novelty of their unusual family faded into simple acceptance, until people forgot to think of Grusha as an orc and simply knew her as Henrik's wife, as the girl's stepmother, as the talented carver who could make anything from wood. Other orcs occasionally appeared at their door, having heard rumors of one of their kind living peacefully among humans. Some were skeptical, some desperate, some simply curious. Henrik and Grusha welcomed them all, offered what help they could, and slowly built a bridge between two peoples who had been enemies for generations. Not every orc who came chose to stay, and not every human was willing to extend the same acceptance Grusha had received. But seeds were planted, possibilities opened. Clara grew into a serious young woman who studied medicine, determined to help people the way her father had helped Grusha all those years ago. Emma became a teacher, her natural exuberance and kindness making her beloved by her students. Both girls grew up understanding that family was not defined by blood or appearance, but by love and commitment, a lesson that shaped them into compassionate, open-minded adults. On the 10th anniversary of that day, Henrik had found Grusha in his shed. They stood together on the porch of their expanded home, looking out over the property that had grown to include not just their original house, but also Grusha's workshop, a proper barn, and extensive gardens. Clara and Emma were both visiting with their respective partners, and the house was full of laughter and conversation and life. "You ever regret it?" Henrik asked Grusha quietly. "Do you ever wish you had just kept running that day instead of stopping here?" Grusha looked at him as though he had asked if she regretted breathing. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have, even if I did not know it when I stumbled into your shed, injured and terrified. You are the family I was meant to find. Every hardship, every struggle, it was worth it to arrive here at this moment with you." Henrik kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise renewed with each touch. They had built something remarkable together, not just a marriage but a testament to the possibility of change, the power of compassion, the triumph of love over fear. And it all started because a man chose kindness over caution, because an orc woman carved toys for children she had never met, because two people decided that what brought them together was more important than what should have kept them apart. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Henrik and Grusha went inside to join their family, their laughter mingling with the others, their home filled with warmth and light and love. The wooden toys Grusha had carved all those years ago still sat on a shelf in the main room. A little horse and rabbit and bird and fox, reminders of how their story began. And in the workshop, Grusha continued to create, her hands bringing life to wood, her art a gift to the community that had given her a home, her every creation an expression of the gratitude and joy that filled her heart. They had found each other against all odds, built a family from broken pieces, created a sanctuary where love mattered more than appearances. And they would continue, day by day, year by year, writing their story together, proving that sometimes the most unexpected connections become the strongest bonds, and that courage and kindness can change not just individual lives but the very fabric of the world around them. Their happily ever after was not perfect, was not without challenges or difficulties, but it was real and it was theirs, earned through perseverance and sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in each other. And that, in the end, was everything.